What's up, guys? Make sure this is working. If you can hear me, type in the chat on the right side just to make sure I'm good to go here. Cool. Sweet. Well, while everybody's getting in here, hope everybody's having a good day too. Want to thank David and everybody for putting this on for us too. I know obviously this was an interesting year, and we were all kind of bummed when we weren't able to do our normal expo there, where we all gather in Columbus, and it's one of my favorite highlights of the whole year too, getting to see everybody and kind of having a couple thousand people, in one place that all share the love of fishing. I think is one of the coolest things that we have around here. So I want to thank them for putting this on too. It's really cool, and it seems to be working out good. I hope everybody's enjoying it so far today. Some good stuff around the expo, online expo, that you guys can check out. But I appreciate you coming in and checking this out today. So I won't waste too much of your time here. We're going to get into some pretty information heavy stuff here. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to put together a talk that I've had a lot of times individually with people, because this is one of the most common questions that I get asked is like, hey, I've got this combo that I got for Christmas or something. What would it be best used for? Or I'm looking at getting a combo for this. What would you recommend? And stuff like that. And I really decided to put together something that would just kind of cover all the bases. So this is a talk about the 5 essential bass fishing combos that you guys are going to need, and really a way to streamline your arsenal so you don't get stuck with those, 30 different combos for all this different stuff that you may or may not need. So we will get into, I guess, why this whole topic kind of came about, and it's probably because I was like a lot of you guys probably listening or have gone through at some point in your life where you take that turn, you get really into fishing, and then what happens is, especially like right now in the wintertime when you're stuck inside a lot, what do? You research gear like crazy. You kind of obsess over having the best gear for certain instances, and I was definitely guilty of that. And what happened was, I went down these rabbit holes of like, I think I need to have the best jerkbait setup. I need to have the best drop shot setup. I need to have all of these like technique specific rods and setups to take my game to the next level, I guess is what I thought. And slowly what happens with that is you get to a point where, yes, like that's very good, and you're getting better gear and you're making yourself a better angler. But eventually what happens is like in this picture where you're going to look out in your garage and you're going to have like 30 combos, and you're like, why do I have all of these? I can't take all these with me on every fishing trip. Especially around here, I do a ton of like creek wading. I do a ton of kayaking, all that kind of stuff. You can't take 30 combos with you whenever you're doing it, or that you're limited to like 3 or 4 in a kayak and 1 while you're wading. So I really just kind of looked in the mirror and was like, why do I have this many combos when 3/4 of them just sit in my garage and don't get used unless there's just like a certain day where I know that I'm going to go out and tear them up on a jerkbait, and I'm going to take that jerkbait rod with me, right? So it didn't seem smart. And so eventually what happened was like, I started out with very few combos. I talked myself into getting all of these combos. And then slowly what happened was like, now I want less combos. I want I want to be as versatile as I can be out on the water. And I want combos that can serve multiple purposes. And that was something that I didn't hear a lot of people talking about because, again, fishing industry and stuff, everybody wants to sell you stuff. Obviously, it's the whole point of it. So yes, they're going to tell you need a dedicated jerkbait setup or a dedicated Ned rig rod or something like that. But the truth is that a lot of these rods will handle 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 techniques and handle them fairly well if you set your arsenal up right. So that was kind of where this led to, and I slowly shrunk my arsenal down to 5 rods. And 5 rods will cover 99.9% of anything I could ever want a rod to do here in Ohio. So I really embraced that kind of less is more mentality, where I feel better about myself now in terms of like, I don't stress out before I go fishing of like, oh no, what rod am I going to take? Do I have the right line on it? Do I have the right everything? Just I'm sure a lot of you have that where you kind of have like the day before anxiety of, am I taking the right stuff with me? Am I using the right stuff? This really eliminates a lot of that headache when you only have 5 rods to choose from and you know that it can handle 10 different techniques. It just makes your life a lot easier. So we're going to get right into it. So all of this stuff here is stuff that you guys, feel free to screenshot. If you want to, after this, I'm going to leave all my info. You can message me. I can send you these slides, everything. But this is really what I put together of kind of my optimal arsenal of 5 rods that I think handle just about everything. So the first combo in this arsenal is your spinning setup. And it is your own spinning setup. So before you kind of freak out on that, hear me out. I used to have like 4 or 5 different spinning setups that I used to use for all different stuff. And I would tell myself that, this one spinning setup was my Ned rig rod, and this one spinning setup was my shaky head rod, and then I had a popper and topwater rod and stuff like that. And slowly what I realized is like, if you blindfolded me, like I probably couldn't tell you too much difference in the action of a lot of those rods. It's a spinning rod, right? As long as they're relatively the same length and, one's not an ultralight and one's not a medium heavy, right? It's a spinning rod. It can handle just about anything. So I really went middle of the road with this, and this will handle anything I need a spinning rod to do. So the rod itself is a 7-foot medium fast. 7 foot, again, fairly standard. That's going to be pretty normal here. I wouldn't go below 7 foot because then you're sacrificing a lot of casting distance. You're going to see that as a pretty common thing in this talk too, that a lot of these rods are going to be 7 foot or over. Doesn't mean you can't use a 6.6 or a 6.8 or something like that. Just my personal preference. I think 7 foot is that real sweet spot of practicality and casting distance. And then obviously a fast tip, you're going to see that as a common theme here too. Fast tip, for those of you that don't know, basically means the way that rod loads up when you set the hook on a fish or when it, kind of incurs pressure, is that the top of that rod is where a lot of that bend comes from, and it lets you set the hook quicker, drive a hook home a little bit better. Fast is fairly normal. You're going to see moderate and stuff around, but that's usually for crankbaits and stuff that we'll get to in a minute. Fast is probably 90% of the rods you're going to see out there on like your local Cabela's shelf or something are going to be a fast tip. And the one thing I didn't put on here, but I would like to mention, is that this is going to be a one-piece rod. Like, unless you are really getting on planes a lot or something, you're traveling all around, I don't see the need, or you have a really small car, I really don't see the need to have a 2-piece spinning setup. I know it looks convenient when you buy them and stuff, but you are sacrificing some feel and some sensitivity in that rod when you go 2-piece versus 1-piece. I really believe that. So I would recommend a 1-piece rod for this. Your reel size, that's a 2500 size spinning reel. That's fairly standard. That's like Shimano sizing too. So if you're using Fluger or whatever, it might be like a 30 or a 35. I'd have to look at what their comparable size is, but it's something like that. But just kind of a normal middle of the road bass fishing freshwater spinning reel. So nothing fancy there. It will cover everything you need. Plenty of line capacity. It will do the job. And then your line. So I'm pretty specific on this. 10-pound braid is what I found that can cover the most scenarios, I think, in my mind. And I used to use like 15-pound and sometimes even 20-pound. You go down to that 10-pound braid, you can cast from, I'm in Dayton right now, I feel like I can cast from Dayton to Columbus. Like, it's insane how far you can cast with a line that small, but it's still very strong. You're not really going to encounter too many things on a spinning rod that are going to break 10-pound braid, especially if you have your drag set right. And then for any instance where you're like, hey, Andrew, I don't want to throw straight braid. I don't feel comfortable throwing that in a creek or, a clear reservoir or something like that. You can tie a leader, right? You can tie a 10-pound fluoro leader. You can tie a 10-pound mono leader, whatever you want. It's a very versatile setup, especially when you factor in leaders. And then for each one of these setups, I'm going to break down the primary uses that I use it for, and then kind of some secondary uses that maybe you not have thought of, but in a pinch, again, we have 5 limited combos here that you can use it for. But, a lot of these are going to have another setup down the road that they're going to be used for more. But in a pinch, you could use these for these secondary uses as well. So primary uses, Ned rigs, wacky rigs, poppers, blade baits, grubs, inline spinners, drop shots, anything you're going to throw on a spinning rod, I firmly believe I can throw on a 7-foot medium fast rod. There's nothing too crazy that I don't think I even throw, like I said, drop shots on it, and it's fine. And that's kind of, one of the lightest rods I feel like I could need around here. And then your secondary uses, so things you may not think about too much. Jerk baits, especially in like a river situation or a creek situation. A lot of you guys are fishing for saugeye or walleye or stuff like that. You're fishing at night, all kinds of stuff. Jerk baits are kind of a sneaky thing to throw on this setup too. It works really well. Spooks as well, and paddle tail swim baits. So the way I kind of look at this is like anything I would throw in a river for smallmouth, I think I can throw on this setup pretty much. I can't think of anything that would be too overkill for smallmouth fishing on the spinning setup. So it's the only spinning setup that I have. It works very well, and I haven't really seen a need for anything else. The one thing I will say is because it's your only spinning setup, I'd probably recommend throwing a snap on this. So one of those little clips, especially if you're waiting or doing anything like that. Quick changing of your lure is key. I have never really found an issue with fish being line shy or really worried about that snap. I mean, every hook that or every lure that you're throwing has a giant shiny hook sticking out of it too. So I don't see why that hook would not turn them off, but a tiny, tiny snap would. Just kind of how I think. I really don't think a snap is a big issue at all. So I have that on this at all times. So your second combo here is going to be a cranking setup. And your cranking setup here is, one of the only ones in here it's going to be super, super niche, I guess. I can't think of a better word for it, but just a niche use for this. And I think you have to have a cranking setup. You can use a regular medium heavy. It's just not going to be the same. So your cranking setup here is going to be a 7 to 7.3 medium heavy cranking stick. And you're going to want to make sure that it's a cranking rod. That's something you're going to have to kind of delineate here, is make sure it's a crankbait model, because there's a big difference between a medium heavy crankbait rod and a medium heavy regular rod. So if you would hold up like a medium heavy, just regular fast rod that you would pick up at the store, and then a medium heavy crankbait rod, that crankbait rod's going to feel like a wet pool noodle, right? It's just going to go like this. And then your other rod's going to feel like a normal rod, and it's going to be more stout. And the reason that crankbait rod is kind of noodle-like is because it's a lot more moderate bend, which means when you hook a fish, when that rod loads up, that means that rod is going to bend. It's going to be a lot more, parabolic, I guess, where it would go all the way around. And that's really going to keep that fish pinned. It's going to make a crankbait feel a whole lot better. You're not going to lose a lot of fish and kind of pop those trebles out. That real moderate bend to it and a little bit more give is a big deal for treble hooks and for crankbaits. And then the other side of this is going to be your reel, and this is going to be a niche reel as well. It's going to be a very slow reel. So a 5-to-1 gear ratio or a 6-to-1 gear ratio reel. It's going to be a casting reel, obviously. And back in the day, you see a lot more 5-to-1s. Now 6-to-1 seems to be where a lot of these are, I guess, kind of starting at, and they'll go like 6-to-1, 7-to-1, 8-to-1 in a lot of these models. But I really like a 5-to-1 if you can find it. If not, 6 works fine, like a 6.2, 6.4, whatever, all that's fine. But the easiest way to think about this is you want a low gear ratio reel, because I think probably the easiest way to explain it would be like when you're riding a bike. So when you're riding a bike and it's got gears on it as well, right? You go like 1 through 10 on a mountain bike or something. When you're using 10, what are you doing? You're doing like your downhill pedaling or your flat land pedaling, the easiest terrain, right? With a crankbait's pretty hard terrain on that reel, right? You're cranking, you're reeling. There's a lot of water displacement, a lot of resistance there. It's the same thing on a bike, is like trying to go up a hill. And when you go up a hill on a bike, what do? You lower your gear. You go like gear 1 or gear 2, where you're pedaling the same kind of speed, and you're just not going as far, and you're going slower, but it's easier to take on kind of those big inclines. It's the same thing with a reel. So with that reel, a 5-to-1 gear ratio reel is going to reel slower, but it's going to be easier for a big, water displacement, or for bouncing that crankbait, getting it reeled down and kind of digging on the bottom and stuff. So it's the easiest way I can explain it. It's the same thing as a mountain bike. You want a lower gear ratio for harder work, and the hardest work that your reel is going to do is going to be, reeling in like a DT10 or something. So your line as well is kind of important here, and I really like fluorocarbon for my cranking setup, because on a cranking setup, you want that crankbait to get down to its desired depth, and that's going to be why you want fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon sinks. It will let that kind of crankbait get down as far as it really needs to. If you use monofilament, it won't go down quite as far. So like a DT10 maybe only goes to 8 or something, I don't know. But it just won't go down as deep as you want. And the name of the game with crankbait is obviously busting that crankbait off the bottom and off rocks and stuff. So you want to get it down as low as possible. So fluorocarbon is kind of a must here. I usually use 12, but you can go up to 14 if you really want, if that makes you feel more comfortable. Again, with fluorocarbon, the lower the number on there, so like the thinner the line, the deeper that crankbait's going to go. So you're kind of trading out strength for depth. So think about that too when you're thinking about your line. But I really like 12 for this. Primary uses, obviously, kind of a duh moment here is going to be square bills, deep divers, medium divers, anything crankbait. The only thing I would say is like, I probably wouldn't put lipless crankbaits in there. Any crankbait that's got a bill on it, that's diving down to a certain depth and is really going off the bottom and kind of beating the rocks and stuff like that. A lipless crank, I know it's got the word crankbait in its name, but it's a little bit more like a blade bait or something. So we'll get to that a little bit later. I probably wouldn't use it for this. But secondary uses, again, there's some sneaky uses for this. Spinner baits and jerk baits are also kind of easily thrown on this. So a spinner bait, I would say you have to be in open water for this. But if you get a medium heavy cranking rod, you can drive one exposed hook home if you really wanted to. So again, it can make a good spinnerbait rod, can also make a good jerkbait rod. The only thing I would say is like if you're getting a 7.3 cranking rod, that might be a little long for a jerkbait stick. At least for me, I'm a short guy, so if I'm standing on the bank and I'm trying to throw a jerkbait with a 7.3 rod, I'm going to be hitting the rocks, I'm going to be hitting the ground or doing whatever. If I'm on a boat, it's a little bit easier, and I can throw a jerkbait on this setup. But again, or if you're just tall, or you're running out of combos and you're on the boat right now and you're on a tournament or something and you really want to throw a jerkbait, this will work for that too. And again, you got that parabolic rod, you got kind of light line here, so you won't really rip those trebles out. So that is combo number 2, your cranking setup. Combo number 3 is going to be your topwater rod. And there's only one kind of real topwater that we'll get to a little bit that this won't really cover, which I'm sure you can see the obvious one that's missing down there. But this is a nice little rod to have, especially in the late spring, summer, early fall. These kind of treble hooked topwater baits is really what this is going to shine for. So your rod's going to be 7 foot, medium and fast. So not a medium heavy. This is going to be a lighter rod. Just a regular medium rod. 7 foot, I think, is great. I don't think you need 7.3 for this because, again, a lot of these lures that you're going to look at in a minute are going to be, where you're working them down with the rod tip down. So I think a shorter rod works pretty well here. A 6-to-1 or a 7-to-1 reel, just middle of the road casting reel is fine. Nothing crazy, nothing too fast or too slow is fine here. And then your line, and this is where it gets important too, is 10 to 14 pound monofilament. And we've covered braid a little bit. There will be another braid one here in a second. We've covered fluorocarbon a couple times. Monofilament it has a place, right? It used to be kind of the industry standard back before, the super lines and the braids and the fluorocarbons and nylons really came around and, they became the hot new thing. Monofilament was the leader in the clubhouse for a reason. It's kind of the OG line, and it still has a spot in your arsenal. It's just kind of a niche spot now. And that spot, to me, is topwater. So you got your monofilament line, you got your normal casting rod, and reel, you got your 7 foot medium, and then your primary uses, topwaters with treble hooks. So poppers, spooks, prop baits, anything that's got trebles, that monofilament one is going to help that lure float. So these are topwaters, monofilament floats, topwaters float. Obviously, if you're going to use fluorocarbon, it's going to the line's going to sink and it's going to try and drag your lure down. You don't want that. So monofilament works great for this. It also has that stretching ability too, so it won't pull those trebles out of that fish's mouth, which is a problem sometimes, especially with the last one, prop baits. So a prop bait is like a whopper plopper or a devil's horse or something like that. And that's a pretty hot topic sometimes. It's like, what do you throw a whopper plopper on? I firmly believe that monofilament is the best line to throw a whopper plopper on. If you've ever thrown a whopper plopper, those hooks right out of the box are probably as sharp as hooks are legally allowed to be. I mean, you will wreck some fish if you use too strong a line. If you're using braid or fluorocarbon, I don't know why you'd use fluorocarbon, but if you're using braid and you really lay a hook set in that fish, you can kill some fish with those big treble hooks. So again, this is just kind of a nice way to keep that fish pinned. The hooks will do the work, and it really helps the action of that too. If you use like a fluorocarbon or something, you're not going to get the action on that prop bait that you want. Secondary uses, square bills and jerkbaits. Jerkbaits, again, are a fairly you can throw that on almost anything, I think, unless it's just too stiff of a rod. But square bills, again, both of those are treble hook baits. The sneaky use for this, I think, is if you're on the bank. If you're on the bank, one of the worst things that can happen is you throw a crankbait or you throw a square bill and you get snagged. And, because that lure is supposed to dig down a little bit. I mean, jerkbaits are supposed to dive to a certain depth. Square bills obviously dive to a certain depth. If you get hung up on something, your chances of getting that lure back are slim to none. That floating capacity of the monofilament helps just not have that lure dig as hard because it's got a little bit of force trying to pull it up as that bill is helping it get down, and it just kind of helps you deflect a little bit better. So off of wood, off of rock, things like that, it doesn't get snagged as easy. Or if you do get snagged and you give it that kind of pop, again, you got floating line that will just kind of help release that lure a lot of times. So I like it for fishing from the bank for some of those small moving baits like jerk baits and square bills. So your fourth combo here is your workhorse setup. And this is going to be your one rod. Like if you're going to spend big money on a rod and reel combo, this is it. This is the one that you want to drop your money on. This is the one that, your house is on fire. You get to grab one rod before you leave. Which one do you grab? This one. This is the one that can handle almost anything. And there are very few things I don't feel comfortable throwing on this setup. So your rod is a 7 foot to 7.3 medium heavy fast. If you bass fish at all, 7 foot medium heavy fast is just kind of like the pinnacle of versatile rods, and this is no different. This is going to be that versatile rod. I like 7.3 because, again, I've just gotten used to it. I like that extra 3 inches of being able to cast a little bit further, have a little bit more control, but I understand a lot of people like 7 foot. That's fine. Medium heavy fast, obviously, and then your reel. a normal fast reel. So a 7-to-1 and 8-to-1 nowadays. I think I use an 8-to-1 on the Shimano Corrado that I have on mine. And, just a normal fast casting reel, because you're going to want to pick up line relatively quickly for a lot of these techniques you're going to use this for, but nothing super special here. And then your line, I'm going to use really heavy line for this. This is one where I get a lot of weird looks sometimes. I throw 20-pound fluorocarbon on this setup, and I guess if we were fishing in like, Florida or Okeechobee or something, you wouldn't look at me weird for having 20-pound fluoro on, but I really like that heavier line. I'd thrown, 15, 16-pound fluoro on this setup before, and I just had instances where I broke off in situations where I didn't think I should have broken off. There's nothing more frustrating than that. So I really decided I would rather trade, and again, I don't know if you really do trade bites for this, but it's my reasoning. Is like, if I up my line and maybe there's one line shy fish every couple weeks that doesn't bite me because of that extra 4 pounds of fluorocarbon on there or whatever it is, so be it. But I know that anything that does bite that, I can set the wallop on and I can get that fish. I can drive that hook home and I can get that fish to the boat or the bank. So I like the confidence of knowing that I can set the hook as hard as I want. I don't have to worry about a line breaking. I feel very confident with that 20-pound fluoro. And I've done, like, again, I'm not a fish, but I've done it in like a tank before where I've held 16, 18, and 20-pound fluoro in there. I can't tell the difference at all. It's not like, holy cow, that one is super visible and that one's not. They're relatively the same. So I just like beefing up. It's one of those why not sort of things, and it's done pretty well for me. So I recommend giving it a shot for those higher pound test lines if you really want to. It'll just give you more confidence and a little bit stronger line behind you. Primary uses: Texas rigs, flipping jigs, football jigs, chatterbaits, spinner baits, anything that you want to throw on this, it can pretty much handle. Again, all of those that I just mentioned are single hook baits. So baits that you really need to drive a hook home. You get bit on a chatterbait on a weed line. You want to be able to drive that hook home. You get bit on a Texas rig. You got to kind of drive the hook home hard enough that it pops out of that plastic and really penetrates. Like you need some backbone in this setup, and this setup does just that. Your secondary uses, sky's the limit. I mean, honestly, almost anything you can throw on this. You can throw rattle traps on it. You can throw the lipless cranks like we talked about earlier, kind of the same thing. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with this if you really want to, but this is just like my all-around, if I take one rod with me for the day, this is going to be it. And then your fifth combo here is going to be what I call your meat stick. And your meat stick here is going to be for just those instances where you need something strong. This is like your overkill rod. And you're going to look at some of these specs and be like, yeah, that might be overkill. It's not. This is one of those rods. It's like, you go big or go home. Why would you not go heavy and go big braid and things like that? So your rod, 7.3, heavy, fast. I'm a big proponent on the 7.3 on this one. I don't think a 7-foot and a 7.3 will perform the same way, at least in my experience with what we're about to talk about in a second for using this rod for. I really like 7.3. Heavy, and that's a relative term, I know, sometimes, because different rod manufacturers have heavies and mag heavies, and there's one that has like a heavy, medium heavy. The heaviest rod that rod maker makes for regular bass fishing is probably going to be what I'm going to pick for this setup. And then a fast tip, obviously you're going to be setting the hook. You want penetration. You want that fast taper to it. Reel, as fast as you can get, like 7-to-1, 8-to-1. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road 9-to-1s and 10-to-1s become the norm and stuff like this too, but the fastest reel you can get. So probably an 8-to-1 for this is going to be fairly normal. And then your line, 65-pound braid. I get some people that are like, why don't you throw 50-pound braid? Why don't you throw something a little lighter? My answer is, why not? Like any of these instances that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So your primary uses of like frogging. A bass is not going to look at your frog and decide whether to eat it or not if it's got 50 or 65-pound braid on it. Chances are it's not seeing the braid at all, because you're throwing it around pads, you're throwing it around weeds, all kinds of stuff. It's probably not even getting a look at your line. So if it's not, why would you not use the heaviest line you can get away with? And again, just have that confidence of horsing that fish out of cover, of setting the hook as hard as you need to, and not letting your gear fail you. So 65-pound braid is kind of a must for me on this. You can also use this for punching. You can use this for flipping. Anything with heavy vegetation or cover is going to be where this really shines. Again, obviously mine gets used as a frog rod like 95% of the time, but this is a rod that I can, throw a frog out there, I can let it get smashed, and I can set the hook harder than I physically can, and this rod will hold up to it, the line will hold up to it, the reel will hold up to it. if you need kind of a durable reel in any of this, any one that, really needs to be maybe a full aluminum frame, heavy drag, stuff like that, this is the reel to do that on. So you do need a durable reel for this, or you're going to blow up a lot of reels when you're frog fishing. Secondary uses. So there are some uses for this that I use sometimes that aren't for frogs or aren't for flipping or punching. One of those being a buzz bait. A buzz bait, again, I don't think a bass is going to see your line. What happens with a buzz bait is you throw that buzz bait and it's going down the surface of the water on the edge. That bass kind of feels it or sees it from like 10 feet away and just instinct says, I'm going to go smash that thing. I'm going to go try and kill it. Like, it's not going up to it, getting out in front of it, taking a look at the line, inspecting it, and being like, nope, sorry, that's 65. That's not 30. I'm not hitting that. Like, it's just pure instinct. So, again, buzzbait, I think, is fine to throw on this. Alabama rigs as well. I know Alabama rigs aren't as popular, I guess, around here as they are some other parts of the country, but Alabama rigs do well on this rod, too. Again, it's a very heavy lure, like a chandelier or whatever you want to call it, umbrella rig. All the same thing, a very heavy lure with multiple appendages and a lot of weight behind it. You want kind of a thick rod and thick line, and this will handle that too. So that is the fifth combo here. So as a recap, you have these 5 combos. You have a spinning setup, a cranking setup, a topwater setup, a workhorse setup that's going to be handling just about everything, and then your meat stick. And I firmly believe those 5 setups will get you through like 99.9% of any type of fishing that you could do here in Ohio. I really can't think of anything I would need for anything else. So that's taken a lot of the anxiety of fishing out of this for me, and a lot of the anxiety of shopping for gear. And it really let me know, like, hey, I don't feel as guilty maybe spending a couple $100 on a setup if I know it's one of 5 and not one of 100 that are in my garage that don't get used. And I like knowing that worst case scenario, if I'm going on a kayak tomorrow, I can take my whole rod and reel arsenal with me. I can fit 5 rods in my kayak. If you're going to go fish a tournament tomorrow, you can take your whole arsenal with you. If you're a co-angler and you only get the back of the boat, you can take your whole arsenal with you. So I just like knowing that I have a streamlined approach to my rods, and I took a lot of the guesswork out of it, and this has worked for me. So hopefully that works for you guys too. I appreciate any feedback that you guys have. I know we're going to take some questions here in a second too. I know there have been some scrolling in the chat too that I'll get to in a second. But after this, if you want access to these slides or to clarify something or ask any questions, you can find me on Facebook /Tackle Talk Podcast, Instagram at Tackle Talk Podcast. We have a website, tackletalkpodcast.com. We stream on all your major streaming services. And we have new episodes every Tuesday. So a lot of our episodes are very similar to what we just did and what we just talked about. The whole point of Tackle Talk is for kind of middle of the road folks. So folks that didn't just start fishing yesterday and aren't pros. You're somewhere in the middle and you know that, hey, I would really enjoy sitting down, on the way to work or on the way to the lake or whatever and flipping on a 30 to 45 minute podcast where we'll talk about specific techniques and kind of hopefully make you a better angler after 30 to 45 minutes of sitting down. So that's really what we do. And we have some cool guests too. A couple weeks ago, we had like Mike Iaconelli. We've had Boyd Duckett, had Fluke Master, a lot of really cool folks that stopped by too, and we talked some fishing. But just a kind of middle of the road show. So I really appreciate all of you guys, everybody. I know I've seen some in here that have been listening to. So I appreciate you guys so much. And we're going to take some questions now too. So I'm going to scroll back up, see if I can find, I know there were a couple that came through. Excuse me. Let's see here. It says, I fish out of a 13-foot canoe. I only have room for 7 setups. Yeah, so I mean that's where all this comes into play. Is like a lot of us don't have huge nitros, where we can have 30 combos with us at once, right? This is more practical. So that's what the whole kind of purpose of this was. Austin says, hard to beat a 7-foot medium fast rod for a go-to rod. Just about any species in Ohio, my favorite setup for bass and walleye. Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about the spinning setup. Yeah, I mean that's my river rod, my creek rod, everything. And like I said, it's a spinning setup. So a lot of times for those walleye that you're talking about, you're fishing at night. Fishing at night with a bait caster is miserable. Like you can't see what you're doing. You can't thumb your spool right. You're going to backlash a lot. It's just miserable, especially in the wintertime when you're targeting walleye. So it's where your spinning rod comes into play for sure. Let's see. The age old, they bite a spinner bait is all metal and wire. Yeah, no kidding. I think we give fish too much credit sometimes of, being line shy or, something may not look natural. It's like I've told people before, it's like if you've got a popper hanging there, how many fish go up and actually inspect a popper? A lot. Like a lot of fish will kind of nose up to a popper before they eat it. There's a lot on that popper that doesn't look natural. There's two, treble hooks hanging off of it. There's hardware, there's feathers, all kinds of stuff that don't look natural. I think we give fish a little too much credit sometimes. Their brains like this big. Like I don't think they're doing 4D chess down there deciding whether or not they hit something. Let's see. James says, I agree with the 12 to 14 pound fluoro. Thank you. This says, can crankbait rod be a glass rod? Said Bob. Yes. I think there are some great glass rods out there. Sorry. I used a Dobbins glass rod and I love it. I'd never used a glass rod until like 2 years ago because there's just something about hearing that your rod's made of glass that makes you a little bit uneasy. It's fiberglass. I think they should probably specify, like, if you have glass component to your rods, you're like, I'm bending this rod over, doubling over itself. I don't want glass. Like, that sounds brittle. That sounds, like it's not going to be as flexible as graphite. Glass rods are great, and I think one of the places they do shine is stuff like crankbaits, where, again, you're looking at treble hook baits. You're looking at more of a parabolic bend. You're looking at a place where that fiberglass can really shine. Let's see. Dustin says, so fluorocarbon is heavier or it absorbs water to get down. Anyone? Yeah, it just sinks. It's more dense than water, I think. Again, I'm not I don't know what that would be, scientist or anything, but I think fluorocarbon is more dense than water, which makes it sink. Monofilament is less dense than water, which makes it float, and those are kind of where those properties come from. All right, this says suggestions for budget rod and reel choices. There's a lot of really nice brands out there. I don't like to say one is really better than all the others because they all offer something. Every angler's different from what they're looking for. For me, I'll be completely honest. I love Dobbins rods. Dobbins rods are some of my favorite rods out there. Gary, who owns Dobbins rods, is a stand-up guy. If you listen to our podcast, you can go back. I think it was the beginning of last year. We did an episode with Gary, and we talked about the process of making rods and designing them and testing and quality control and the warranties and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to hear what the person behind your rod is like, Gary's a great guy for that. They have great warranties, great customer service, which is important to me too, because if I'm going to buy a rod, I want to know there's a good company behind it, that if something does happen to it, they'll stand by their product. Gary's definitely one of those guys. So I think that's worth the price in itself. But as far as budget goes, they make a Fury rod that's around $120. It's really great. Budget reels, I've always said that I think Bass Pro Qualifier 2s are some of the best budget reels out there. Aluminum frame, smooth as can be. They're durable. You can usually find them, I think regular price, they're like $100, but they usually go on sale for like, 70, 75, quite a bit. The Spring Classic, I think, is coming up. So usually they go on sale for that too. And you can usually do a trade-in program to get more money off of them. So I think last year or 2 years ago, I got Pro Qualifiers for like $50. So they're a great budget reel. But for a budget reel, I'm usually just looking for the lowest price reel I can get that is all aluminum frame, is one of the things I'm really looking for. Okay, let's see here. What is your favorite creek fishing setup and lure? Love the podcast. Thank you. I would say my favorite setup is going to be that spinning combo. Honestly, I don't need anything more than a 7-foot medium spinning rod, 2,500 size reel, some 10-pound braid, and go out and have fun. My favorite lure in the creeks by far is a popper. I mean, my favorite type of fishing all year long is always going to be just, putting on an old pair of shoes, an old pair of shorts, getting in the water and wading in the summertime. It feels great. It's like, 80 degrees, 90 degrees outside. You're in the water. You can wade all day long and you don't get too hot. And just throwing a popper and letting that thing get smashed by like small creek smallmouth is about as fun as fishing can be, I think. So that's kind of my roots. That's what I really like to do. I spend a lot of the summer doing it, is chasing creek smallmouth on topwater. Let's see here. Corey says, one thing I do to maximize space on the kayak is bring an extra reel with mono or braid. Just switch it out when I have. Oh, yeah. So that's a good point, too. So there's nothing that says you can't keep spare reels with you and then just, use that same rod and cut your line and then put a new reel on. That's fine, too. So a lot of people will do that. You'll have a backpack that you can keep a couple different reels in and switch depending on what you want to do. It's a good point to make, too. This says, what about panfish? I'm thinking light or ultralight. Yeah, so obviously this is for your 5 essential bass fishing combos too. If you're going after panfish, then yeah, ultralights are tough to beat. I think I have like a 5.6 micro light that I use sometimes for bluegill, for trout, for that kind of stuff too. Just a whole lot of fun. But yeah, if you're going after panfish, you will need some lighter line, some lighter rods, stuff like that. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to look at something smaller than a 7-foot medium if you're really going after panfish. Let's see. And last question here from Dan King says, what are medium light rods? I use them for finesse bass fishing or small Texas rigs. Thoughts? Oh, probably what about medium light rods? Yeah, I mean, you can substitute the medium for a medium light if you want. This was just one of those things where you're trying to condense into the smallest number of rods you can. And I don't think, at least for me, geez, something around here made a popping noise and it scared the crap out of me. Sorry. For me, you know, there's nothing I think that I can't do with a medium that I can do with a medium light. I think it's what it came down to. Some of the smallest stuff I can think of would be like a rooster tail or, you know, a small Ned rig or something like that. I can throw those on a medium rod. So I think that was, I guess, my reason for not putting a medium light in there. But there are a lot of people I know that will say, hey, I don't need a medium. I just need a medium light. And they like a little bit more fight in their spinning rods. That they don't use it for any sort of single hook applications where you need to drive the hook home and it's all trebles. Then yeah, you can get away with medium light for sure. Don says, opinion on 8-foot rods. I'll be honest, man, the way that I've been going, you know, the past 3 or 4 years, my rods have gotten longer and longer. And it's just, you know, I like, once I get used to a longer rods, like I used to be, you know, 6 to 7 foot, and then I went 7 foot, and then I went 7.3. I wouldn't be surprised if I add a longer rod at some point. But the thing that I have to always be cognizant of is I'm a really short dude. I'm like 5'9". So an 8-foot rod for me doesn't make sense a lot of times, especially if it's any sort of scenario where I have to have the rod tip pointed straight or down. So jerk baits, topwater, frogs, stuff like that. Like, I mean, my frog rod's a 7.3 because I think you need a 7.3, but you know, even that is tough sometimes depending on where I'm standing. So just I don't know, for me and my body type, I guess I don't think 8-foot rod makes a bunch of sense. I also do a lot of fishing out of a kayak, and the thing that I've found is the longer the rod, it's harder to get that hook, that fish to the kayak and then get it netted, because obviously you got more rod to go out and kind of net on. So you have to kind of I don't know how to explain this. When you're in the kayak, you know, you get your rod and you're pulling it over here, and then on the other side you're trying to dip this net. The longer that rod is, the harder it is to net the fish. So I kind of top out at 7.3. But again, I could see an 8-foot rod having its uses. I know some guys have some crazy long rods for like surf rods and stuff, and I think the only rod I have that would be that long would be my muskie setup. James says, will that frog rod handle other top water baits? It definitely will. The only thing I think that I shy away from is I do tend to think that some of those other top water baits, like a popper or a spook or something like that, I think 65-pound braid might get you less bites, because those are top water baits where they will come and kind of take a look at it sometimes. Now, spook, you know, you can make the argument, and sometimes even poppers, that they'll come from far away and smash it, but there will be fish that will come a little bit closer and give it a little bit kind of closer look before they commit to that. And I think that 65-pound braid, especially in open water, may not make a whole lot of sense. And there aren't really a whole bunch of top water baits that aren't treble hook. That's the other thing with that 65-pound braid. You have the chance of ripping treble hooks out. It's not very conducive for treble hook baits. But I can't think of too many other single hook besides the buzzbait, obviously, that we put in there, or some other like kind of one-off stuff like the stuff that's like a frog, but it's a different shape. So it could be like the soft-bodied sunfish or something like that. I can't think of anything else that I would really opt for the frog rod over the smaller top water rod. So it's kind of my thoughts on that. Again, a lot of this is not to say that you can't, because you definitely can. It's just been kind of what I've found and what I think makes sense after sitting down and thinking about this for years and trying to put together a plan. Dan says, what are your preferred favorite line brands? That's a good question too. So I've went through a lot of line, and I've had some really good experiences with line. I've had some really bad experiences with line, and line is one of those things that once I have a bad experience with it, I'm probably never going back to it. Line is very important to me because it's the one thing that connects me to the fish. Like if that fails, everything else goes out the window. Like, your rod can fail and your rod can snap. You can still get that fish in sometimes. Your reel can fail and your drag can slip, and you can still get that fish in sometimes. If your line fails, you're not getting that fish in. That fish is long gone. So I take a lot of pride in having good line. I think I splurge on line sometimes in terms of I'm a pretty frugal dude, but I'll spend a lot of money for good line. The two lines that I keep going back to for all of my bottom contact baits, I use Sunline. Sunline Sniper fluorocarbon is great. It's pricey, but it's the one fluorocarbon that I have the utmost confidence in when I'm rearing back and setting the hook. I don't want anything else on there. I've tried other lines. I've tried like some Seagars and stuff, and they just didn't hold up the way I wanted them to. Sunline was great, so I've never had a problem with Sunline. I use that for all my bottom contact baits. So like that, the combo number 4, your workhorse rod, that's always got Sunline on it. As far as moving baits, I kind of keep going back and forth. I use Sunline sometimes. The other line that I'll use for moving baits, so like for my cranking setup, is Seagar and VizX. And VizX, again, is expensive, I know, but it's got a little bit more of a stretch component in it than Sunline does, and that's kind of a good thing when it comes to cranking. Treble hooks, again, we keep coming back to this, but it really is. A little bit of give for a treble hook setup is a good thing. So it's a little bit stretchier. I don't really trust it with setting the hook and driving a hook home on a jig or something, but I do trust it with crankbaits or jerk baits or things like that. So Sunline, Sniper, and VizX are the two that I always seem to keep coming back to. Cool. Someone said go Dragons. Thanks, Tom. Go Dragons. Cool. Anybody got anything else? I know we got, I think, 3 or 4 more minutes here, I think. This says Sunline fluorocarbon crank line. Love it. Oh, yeah. I need to branch out a little bit more and try some other Sunlines because I really like Sniper and I'm stubborn and I just stay with it. But I should try and look into some of their other stuff too, Assassin and stuff like that. Braid is one of those things. So Dan asked what kind of braid I'm assuming. I usually just go with whatever's cheaper. I'll be honest with Braid. I think Braid is Braid. If I'm going to use 65-pound braid, I don't care what brand it is. I don't think it's going to break on me. So I usually use Power Pro because it's usually what I can find on sale. I know some guys that really love like Suffix. I know some guys that love all kinds of stuff. But no, I just keep coming back to Power Pro. It's the cheapest. It's never really failed me. It does well. That's usually what I use for like the 10-pound braid for the spinning setup too, is usually just Power Pro. And again, you can find it at Walmart. You can find it relatively cheap. You find some like 25% offs here and there. So I usually just use Power Pro. I've used Suffix 832 before. I like it too. On my musky setup, I use Suffix. And again, I think it's just because it feels a little better, I guess, at that high of a pound test. But I don't think you can really go wrong. I know there's some really cheap ones online too that some weird name ones like Godline, and there's one called Line like LYN and stuff that I'm sure are fine. I really think Braid is Braid. So that's what I go to for Braid. Cool. Well, I think we're about to wrap up here. The last question I think here is from Nathaniel Steiner. He said favorite musky lure. It's got to be a bucktail. I guess it's just what I've had the most luck on. Muskie are the most frustrating and fun fish to chase, but also you'll hate your life for chasing them. You're going to have, 15 trips out in a row with no fish, especially around here. You might get a follow once a month and you think that's just like the best thing in the world. But when you do land one, it is so rewarding. The only thing I say with people is like, if you're going to go target muskie for the first time, do your research, because if you don't do your research, you don't have the right gear, you don't handle them correctly, a lot of those fish are going to die later on. So it's kind of my PSA for muskie is like, if you want to go out and you want to target them, great, I'm all for it, but just make sure you know what you're doing, have the right net, have the right pliers, have the right handling techniques and stuff like that. Don't let that fish fight too much, really get it in quick, because that lactic acid will build up and that fish will die later on. So just kind of do your homework before you go and target those fish for sure. But they are definitely fun. And then Richard said, 20 years, Power Pro best. Yeah, I mean, again, like any other brand, you're going to find people that hate it and you're going to find people that love it. But, at the end of the day, it's been around for a reason. It's on every store shelf for reasons because it works. If it didn't work, it wouldn't be there. And that's kind of, I guess, an overarching theme for a lot of stuff we're going to talk about is people can have favorite brands. People can have opinions on things. Like, I didn't list any, 6.6 rods in this, but people sell 6.6 rods. So there's a reason that they exist. It's because they serve a purpose. So that is the end of our presentation here. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it. Again, shoot me a message on Facebook or Instagram, whatever, if you want to chat or you want any additional insight on any of this stuff. But thank you very much, and hopefully have some of you tune in and listen to the podcast next Tuesday. Thank you very much.